I heard the lock turn before I even reached for the towel. A sharp click. Clean. Final. At first I thought it was a mistake, Drew playing with the knob, maybe checking something. But then I heard his voice through the door. "You'll come out when you learn not to waste things," he said. Then nothing. I wrapped the towel tighter and stood still for a moment, dripping onto the floor. The hot steam was already thinning. My robe hung on the hook, useless now. No window, no food, no clock. Just four walls and the sound of their television in the other room. His wife laughed at something. I could hear the ice clinking in her glass. A commercial jingle floated down the hallway. Then silence. Then laughter again. I knocked. Lightly at first. Then with the flat of my palm. No response. I tried not to panic. This was Drew. My son. My boy who used to fall asleep on my chest, sticky with jam and bedtime stories. Surely he wouldn't leave me here long. I called his name once, then again. The second time, my voice cracked in a way that embarrassed me. I heard footsteps pass the door. He didn't stop. Hours passed in slow, cold layers. The tile leached the warmth from my body. I sat, then lay down, then sat again. I drank from the tap and tried not to think about food or dignity. By the time the light under the door faded to nothing, I knew. This wasn't a moment. This wasn't a tantrum. This was him saying, "You're not part of this house anymore." I curled up on the bath mat and listened to the sounds of their comfort, the fork on a plate, the shifting couch, the laughter. I waited for the lock to turn. It didn't. And in the dark, I remembered the woman I used to be. I used to wake before the sun hands in flower, before the town even stirred. 4 a.m. every morning for 20 years. The bakery came first, then the lunch shift at the cafeteria, then whatever else I could pick up. Cleaning houses, prepping vegetables, wrapping holiday boxes for extra cash in December. Drew never saw most of it. He was a good student, and I wanted him to stay that way. Focused, rested, unburdened. I paid every tuition bill on time. Never let him know how tight the weeks got. Senior year, when the rent spiked, I sold my wedding ring. He never asked where the grocery money came from. I told him not to worry. That's what mothers do. We shield them even as we bleed. When he graduated and got married, I bought this house with what was left of the savings. It was my gift to him, wrapped in fresh paint and polished floors. I didn't need much, just the small room at the back. He was starting a life. I was finishing one. I remember the way he hugged me when I handed him the keys. "It's yours," I said, "so you'll always have somewhere to land." I didn't tell him the deed was still in my name. My husband, long gone, now used to say never hand someone the whole rope unless you're ready to fall with them. I thought it was a hard way to look at the world. I thought trust was the point. But as I sat curled in that bathroom, thirsty, shaking, listening to my own son laugh through the wall, I began to wonder if I was the one who'd disappeared, not just from the house, from his memory. The woman who made him birthday cakes from scratch, who walked home from night shifts with holes in her shoes, who once stitched her own winter coat to pay his field trip fee. Where had she gone? Maybe she faded the day she moved into the guest room. Or maybe she was still here under layers of quiet, waiting. I moved into the smallest bedroom the week they returned from their honeymoon. No one asked me to. I just thought it made sense. Drew and Natalie took the master suite. I didn't touch their things. I stayed out of their way. I cooked separately. I labeled my groceries. I even bought my own dish soap so there wouldn't be any confusion. For a while, Drew was kind. He'd thank me for dinner if I made extra. Ask how I was sleeping. We'd talk about the news over morning coffee. It wasn't warm exactly, but it was polite. I thought we were adjusting. Then the tone began to shift. One night, he knocked on my door and asked if I could lower the volume on my old TV. "We can hear it through the wall," he said. "It's just distracting." The next week, it was the towels. I had folded them the way I always did, rolled tightly to save space. He said it made the linen closet look messy. After that, it was the milk. "You're drinking a lot?" he said. Not rudely, but not gently either. "We're trying to be mindful of grocery costs." I wanted to tell him I paid for that milk, that I'd covered every grocery bill for the first 2 months after the wedding without saying a word, but I just nodded. One evening, as I passed by the kitchen on my way to the laundry room, I heard them talking. They didn't know I was there. "She's set in her ways," Natalie said softly. "She means well." Drew exhaled. "She'll be gone in a few years. We just have to wait." They weren't whispering. They didn't think they needed to. I stood there for a full minute, holding a basket of clean shirts, letting the words settle. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just steady. I folded his shirts with the same care I had for years. But that night, I closed my door with a different kind of quiet. And when I woke the next morning, I noticed how thin the walls had started to feel. By the time the first night bled into morning, I had stopped calling his name. My voice was hoarse, and the silence had already answered everything I needed to know. The floor was cold, hard tile pressed against my back. My legs cramped whenever I tried to stretch. I sat near the sink, sipping from the faucet every few hours just to quiet the dizziness. I counted the drips between sips. I listened to the faint hum of their television through the wall. They laughed, they cooked. They lived their lives on the other side of a thin door while I waited for a mercy that never came. I had raised him to be kind, to say, "Please, thank you, I'm sorry." But those words had vanished somewhere between the boy I loved and the man who locked the door. At first I told myself he'd come back. Maybe he'd cool off, realize what he'd done, open the door and we'd talk. But when the hours stretched into night, I understood this wasn't a punishment. It was a declaration. I wasn't family anymore. I was an inconvenience with a heartbeat. My body began to tremble from hunger, from anger, from disbelief. I rested my head against the wall and let the cold creep in. Every sound outside became sharper, the scrape of a fork, the clink of a glass, the water running freely from the kitchen tap. By dawn, I wasn't waiting for forgiveness. I wasn't waiting for anything. Something inside me went still, like a candle burning down to the wick. The lock turned the next morning, soft and casual, as if nothing had happened. He didn't look at me. "Don't take so long next time," he said, his tone almost bored. I stepped past him without a word. My legs were unsteady, my throat raw, but I kept walking. Somewhere between the bathroom and my room, the quiet inside me changed shape, no longer fear, but the beginning of a plan. I walked back to my room like I was stepping into a different house. The walls were the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Not the rug, not the old dresser, not even the bed where I used to rest after long shifts. I sat down without turning on the light. The ache in my body was deep, but it was nothing compared to what had settled in my chest. I stared at the closet door for a long time before opening it. The filing box was where I left it, tucked behind a stack of blankets. It still smelled faintly of ink and dry paper. I pulled it down and set it on the floor. Inside were the things I hadn't touched in years. The deed, the insurance policy, a thin blue folder from the bank, and the key to the safe deposit box. I opened the year Drew was born. I unfolded the deed, slowly smoothing the creases with the side of my hand. My name, Marlene Voss, still sat alone at the top. No joint ownership, no transfer, no shared claim. It was still mine. I placed the papers in order, then took out the phone I kept tucked in the nightstand. I hadn't called him in a long time, but his number was still there. Conrad Lane. He used to help me with bakery permits back when I was still working. He retired 5 years ago, but I knew he'd take my call. He answered on the second ring. No small talk. Just what happened. I told him the truth in as few words as possible. Then I asked what I needed to know. "Yes," he said. "You can sell it. Quietly. Legally. It's yours." When I hung up, I placed the deed back in the box and slid it beneath my bed. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there listening to the house breathe around me. And then I opened a fresh page in my notebook and began to write the steps. The next morning, I brewed coffee like nothing had changed. I asked Drew if he wanted toast. I told Natalie the laundry would be done by noon. I smiled when they talked about weekend plans, nodded when they mentioned a new paint color for the living room. They thought I was past it. They thought I'd swallowed the insult, tucked it into some quiet corner like all the others. But I was just giving them space to underestimate me. At night, I wrote. Not memories, not prayers. Just steps. Step 1, sell the house off market. Quietly. No signs. No agents. Step 2, wire the money into the new account. One only I could access. Step 3, leave before they know they've lost. I didn't need to slam doors. I didn't need them to beg. I just needed to vanish before they realized I'd taken back what was mine. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the laptop Drew once gave me for Christmas. The battery barely held a charge, but it was enough. Portugal. Not for any reason, except the air looked clean and the prices were fair. A coastal town where I could buy bread without being known. A small apartment near the sea. I found a one-way flight 3 weeks out. Early morning. No layovers. I booked it using a travel card they didn't know about, then cleared the browser history and placed the confirmation in the back of a cookbook. The plan became my spine. It held me upright when I heard them laughing in the other room. When Drew handed me a bill and said, "You've been using more heat lately," I smiled and said, "Sorry about that." He thought he'd won. He didn't notice the new lock on my bedroom door, or the key I now wore on a chain around my neck. I walked the house before dawn while they were still asleep. The air was still quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator and the old pipes sighing in the walls. I ran my hand along the hallway where I used to mark Drew's height with a pencil. I could still feel the faint ridges under the paint. Years of growth. Years of measuring a boy who now measured me by how long I ran the shower. There were no pictures of me in the living room. Not on the shelves. Not on the walls. Nothing from the bakery. Nothing from his graduation. Just polished furniture and prints of cities they'd never been to. I stood in the doorway and counted every inch I'd paid for every tile, every light switch, every damn cabinet I had picked out on a rainy Tuesday in October. From down the hall, I heard Drew's voice. "That faucet's still dripping," he said to no one in particular. I walked back to my room without a sound. Then I picked up the phone and called the number Conrad had given me. The man answered on the third ring. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready to move forward." He asked one question. "Still cash, yes," I said. "Quiet sale. No listing. I want it done in 3 weeks." We confirmed the timeline, the buyer, the transfer, logistics. I wrote everything down in the small notebook I kept behind the nightstand, then locked the papers away again. When I walked through the living room that afternoon, Natalie was rearranging furniture. She asked if I liked the new layout. I said it looked fine. I smiled because in 3 weeks, none of this would belong to them. And I would never walk these walls again. Each morning I walked to the bank and withdrew just under the limit quiet amounts, nothing that would raise an eyebrow. The teller smiled, thinking I was traveling or gifting money to a grandchild. I smiled back and said nothing. At home, I kept the bills in an envelope beneath the false bottom of my suitcase. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to start again. I didn't need things. I just needed out. I packed slowly. 1 dress, 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, my passport, my bank information, and the watch. His watch, the one my husband wore every day until the day he didn't come home. The leather was worn, the face scratched, but it still ticked. I sat with it in my hands for a long time before placing it between 2 folded shirts. The days moved quickly, each one bringing me closer to gone. Drew barely noticed. He was busy with budgets, making notes on his phone, talking about wall colors and cabinets with Natalie over dinner. He assumed everything was stable under control. He thought I'd faded into the background for good. One night, I heard him on the phone with a friend. "She'll be gone soon," he said, his voice low and sure. "The place will be ours finally." I'm thinking open kitchen, full repaint top to bottom. I stood just around the corner, my hand resting lightly on the hallway wall. They hadn't even looked for me. The idea of me wasn't even part of the plan, just something temporary, something that would eventually remove itself. I didn't move. I didn't speak. They didn't see me, and that was fine. I went back to my room and checked the flight time again, early, before sunrise. The ticket was printed folded and placed beneath my mattress. Every step had been taken. Only one remained. The night before closing, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked in familiar ways, the same pipes, the same wind against the windows. But it all sounded hollow now, like a place rehearsing for someone else's life. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, tracing the rim of my coffee cup. The papers were signed, the funds cleared, and by noon tomorrow, the house would belong to strangers. I had done it quietly, every step sealed behind polite smiles and small talk. I took one last walk through each room. The air felt thin. The scent of paint and polish replaced the warmth that used to linger after bread or coffee. I touched the edge of the counter where Drew once sat doing homework, the same place he had leaned last week, talking about knocking down walls. On my desk sat an envelope and the single house key. I thought about writing something, a line, a name, a warning, but words felt unnecessary now. I sealed it empty. At 5, I dressed in silence. One bag, one watch, one ticket, tucked inside my coat. The taxi headlights washed over the living room window, a pale square of light cutting across the floor. I walked through it and opened the door. The morning air was cool against my face. The house behind me was still. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. No text, no call, no note, just the quiet click of a door that no longer belonged to either of us. When I reached the taxi, the driver asked airport. I nodded. As we pulled away, I looked forward, not sideways. The road curved east, the first light breaking over the horizon. By the time the town disappeared from the rearview mirror, I was already gone in every way that mattered. And the sky ahead looked wide enough to start again. The plane landed just past noon, the sky a soft blur above the tarmac. I stepped off with my coat folded over one arm, my bag light against my hip, and no one waiting on the other side. In the arrivals hall, I followed signs I didn't need to read. No one asked questions. No one knew my face. I handed over my passport and smiled when they asked where I was coming from. Canada, I said. By sunset, I was settled in a room above a bakery that smelled of warm flour and lemon zest. The landlord didn't ask about my past. He handed me the keys and pointed to the water heater. The rent was paid in cash. I told him I didn't know how long I'd stay. He said it didn't matter. The next morning, I walked to the cliffs just as the fishermen were heading out. The sea moved slow and steady. I took my time breathing. The air was clean. My steps were quiet. No one needed me, and no one resented me for it. I bought bread and tea at the corner shop and learned how to ask for change in Portuguese. I found a folding chair in the second-hand store and placed it by the window in my room. The light fell just right there. I showered as long as I wanted. I let the water hit my back until the mirror fogged and my skin turned warm. No one knocked. No one counted minutes. I didn't run. I left. That's different. I chose air that didn't carry his voice doors, that didn't hold his shadow mornings, that didn't begin with tiptoeing around someone else's temper. Back in Arizona, the phone probably rings. The front door opens to strangers now. His voice echoes through empty rooms, still expecting an answer. But I am not there. And here, where the tide keeps no records, I am exactly where I decided to be.